Accept the recording on all my devices. All right, good morning. I'm not Mark, so you get me instead while he is off gallivanting with the royals, I hear, staying at Windsor Castle. So cool experience that he gets to have, and you get me instead. And so I teach probably differently than Mark. You may have seen from my short video. I decided to pace myself. I would have as many slides as Mark had for his last video. So I had the same number of slides, and it took me about 10 minutes less to get through it. So, all right, we're different people. So let's go ahead and start with the text, because we're going to read two texts today. I just want to show you the parallel passage as well. You may have already read it in your free time, if that's fun for you. But we're going to go ahead and just look at both of these. I think it's really important to look at both because there's so much more scholarship on the Mark passage. There's not a lot, as comparatively much, on the Luke 4 passage because the Mark passage is in the lectionary. Hi, Beryl. Welcome. All right, so I'll read the Luke passage. Luke chapter 4, verses 31 through 37. He went down to Capernaum, a city in Galilee, and was teaching them on the Sabbath. They were astounded at his teaching because he spoke with authority. In the synagogue, there was a man who had the spirit of an unclean demon, and he cried out with a loud voice, "Let us alone. What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." When the demon had thrown him down before them, he came out of him without having done him any harm. They were all amazed and kept saying to one another, "What kind of utterance is this? For with authority and power he commands the unclean spirits, and out they come." And a report about him began to reach every place in the region. Okay, we'll stop there. Any questions before we go deeper? Questions about this passage? Questions about things you're wondering? Questions at all?
Hello.
Hello. You're not late.
Jerry
You're good.
has another meeting. So
okay. That's okay. We'll excuse him today. So any questions before we move on with anything else? Okay, I'll have questions for you shortly. All right, so let's take a look at that parallel passage. I'm going to read the Mark passage right now. If you have a pen or pencil handy, I invite you to mark down things that are similar or different, either approach you'd like to take. Things that you notice appear in both passages, or alternately, something you notice appears only in the Mark passage. So this is the parallel passage. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent, and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. So anything that I didn't mention in the video, if you watch the video, I point out a few differences, but anything else between the two that you notice is similar or different? Yeah.
Well, the Mark passage does point out scribal teaching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Luke does not. And what is not really known about that is, if you read Jewish commentaries, they're just a list of previous commentators on this passage.
Mm-hmm.
So you can wade through 30 different references for this one passage.
Mm-hmm.
So scribal teaching was plodding through all of these references.
Yeah, that's interesting. So Les, if you didn't hear on the video, pointing out that the scribes would read through a bunch of different teachings, different analysis of the text, I assume, kind of going through that. And so how the scribes would teach is known to us to some extent. So maybe the scribes were teaching this depth and complexity, and maybe Jesus cut through with a clear message could be a difference. Myers suggests that it's a criticism of the scribes not doing the work they should be doing, like healing, bringing wholeness, that what they're teaching without authority, or the way they teach, doesn't bring those things that they should be bringing to the community. So he looks at it as a more political kind of reading, where it's challenging the powers that be and what those powers are doing for them. Anything else between these two?
The most striking difference for me is in the Mark passage, line 4 from the bottom. A new teaching with authority. Luke does not use the word new.
Yeah.
He says with authority. But instead of saying new, there is a question, what kind of utterance is this?
Yeah.
And Mark calls it a new utterance, a new teaching.
Yeah.
And what is striking for me about this passage and the one for last week is that Jesus is controversial.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
He's asking them to believe something they either have not heard before or have not been impressed upon them, or they maybe do not want to accept or believe.
Yeah, no, that's great to point out the parallel passage.
By controversial, I mean division of opinion,
right?
Or new,
or bringing up controversy, provoking discussion, debate, dialogue. However you want to debate controversial. I see a few things coming through the chat, so hold on a second.
I'm struck by the word new.
I didn't notice that too. So we have someone asking for the scripture reading. Let me put that in here real quick.
Was new in the sense that they hadn't been heard very often.
Yes, yes. But with authority, he's justified what he's saying.
All right. Oh, and we have Bill asking a question that I love. Unclean spirit versus unclean demon. What is the meaning of unclean? And so that's the question. I think in my reading and my understanding that unclean brings with it sort of implications of like ritual cleanliness, cultic importance. Unclean things would not be welcome in a holy place. And so when you say unclean, there's that potential tension that to have an unclean thing in the synagogue on the Sabbath is kind of a violation of that space. So I think it's meant to be provocative. There's certainly other opinions on that, but for me, unclean always carries that. What does that mean to us? If we look through the scriptures and text, we see a lot of associations with ritual cleanliness, purity, and that is how you encounter God, is when you're clean. And so this demon who's unclean, I think, heightens the tension of that scene. Other questions before I... Earl looks...
Well, I mean, what's a clean demon?
Yeah. Well, is there such thing as... Yeah, so Luke uses that phrase, the spirit of an unclean demon, but Mark just uses an unclean spirit. Mark doesn't use the demon language at all.
Yeah.
And so I guess demons must therefore always be unclean.
Yeah. Obviously, it was important to the writers to put that word in there.
Yeah.
But it seems sort of superfluous.
Mm-hmm. That unclean carries through both passages, but demon only in Luke.
Can it be a metaphor for an unclean orientation to theology?
Could be, sure. I think that's an
unclean belief.
It depends if beliefs can be clean or unclean, as understood.
What if it's not authoritative? Is it unclean?
That's a good question. Is something that's not authoritative unclean? So would then the scribes be unclean? But that's not what Mark is getting at in this passage. But that's what I like. I like that kind of wondering about what could this be? What's the potential for uncleanness, right? That thinking expansively, what could it potentially mean? Because I don't think we have a clear answer.
Well, Luke refers to an unclean demon, not the man.
Yes, and even in Mark, there's separation. The spirit is different than the man.
Right, the demon is the demon. Now, in the previous verses, demon is devil or Satan, I believe. Trying to persuade us of an unauthoritative belief. Yeah, I think you have something there that if you go through the chapter and pull, I think in the video I did, it's the chapter 4 of Luke. Spirit is constantly referred to. Then you have devil, then you have demon. You have this whole spiritual realm happening, and that's where theology gets real tricky for me. Is what do I do with that as a person living in this moment in time? Demons are not an operative part of my daily life or how I perceive what's happening. So what do I do?
what do we do with that? How does that inform the reading of the story? Yeah. So let's go ahead to, so we just read through it the first time. What happened in this story? What's the basic outline of what happened here? What happened in our passage today? It's not a trick question. So Jesus is in synagogue on the Sabbath, teaching.
We would say he described it as a healing of the person in the synagogue.
Right, and so he encounters a man who requires healing. Or exorcism is other language.
That's better.
Yeah, well, it depends. I think that there's a range of what you could say happens. Who contacts the other first? Who reaches out to confront the other? Does the demon reach out to Jesus, or does Jesus reach out to the man?
Demon reaches.
Yeah, and I don't know if that matters, but I think it's interesting. So a demon reaches out to Jesus. Jesus rebukes the demon. The demon leaves the man, and the people are amazed, and the word of his power spreads throughout the region. So that's what happens here. And so the parallel reading things I point out are distinct in Luke's account, besides things that you happen to have caught. The word demon, I think I like to talk about demons because I was constantly in trouble in my creeds and confessions class for not having room for Satan and demons in my theology very often. And so the professor kept asking me to come around on demons, and I kept saying, no, thank you. I don't know what to do with demons. And so that's part of my theology and my struggles with this is how do we handle that language? Also distinct in Luke's account, as Les pointed out, there's no mention of the scribes. In Mark, there's a contrast between Jesus and human authority. In Luke, you don't have that contrast between Jesus and human authority in this passage. That this is between Jesus and a demon or spirit. In Mark, there's human conflict as well as spiritual conflict. And no harm befell the man. I think that's really interesting in Luke's account. Mark doesn't seem to care whether or not this man came out of this fine, or he doesn't follow what happened to him. In Luke, it's important that the man's fine. I think Mark is a little more violent in terms of like, he is shaken back and forth by the spirit. In Luke, he is thrown down. So it's sort of a different mechanism. And I saw too, so Bobby and then Les.
I was going to say, when I think about unclean spirit and, how does that translate to our world today? And I really think about depression and mental illness and all of that.
Yeah.
And, if it was suddenly lifted from a person, it would be evident.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. And that's, we're going to expand on that too, is what do you do with that? And so part of that is finding that parallel to human struggles we've witnessed. And I think it's helpful to make it as personal as we can and not say that person has a demon, but like, what are my demons? I think is helpful to talk about it in that way. Les?
Well, it dawned on me just now that Jesus has committed a major no-no. He healed on the Sabbath.
Yep.
That was strictly verboten.
Yeah. And publicly and loudly with this yelling spirit crying out at this man, and nobody missed the fact that Jesus broke the law, did the wrong thing, and wasn't subtle. Everybody knows now that happened. And so is that part of why this tale spreads through the region? This authoritative teaching. And also, he's a criminal. He did the wrong thing. He is not allowed to be doing this thing he did. So there's some more nuance in what that message is that's going on about Jesus.
I think that gets used against him at some point, isn't it?
I don't know if it's this particular healing, but he does heal elsewhere on the Sabbath.
On the Sabbath.
Yeah. So theological question. This is my biggest thing I focused on in the video and what troubles me in this passage. For whatever reason, in the last year, I've not preached a lot. I've preached twice on unclean spirit stories. So it's just interesting to me that it's something I've been considering and reading, and I still don't know where I end up on it. So that was today. I wanted to talk about demons with all of you and see if I could leave with a better understanding. And so there is a problem of demythologizing demons in that often people will find a medical parallel or a rational parallel. And that's why I said I think it's important when we do this not to put it on other people and to say like, oh, that person's weird, they must have a demon, or that must be what Jesus was talking about, because I think we can stigmatize really easily that way. Epilepsy can be stigmatized. Other illnesses, mental health struggles can be turned into that. So I'm trying to find the line of taking this story seriously, letting story stand on its own terms, but also trying to figure out what to do with language of demons. And I love the quote from Fred Craddock talking about how when we're like, oh, demons must just be a quaint way of talking about something we know today. But he says, all this seems very primitive to an enlightened modern. We have not, by the announcement that we do not believe in demons, reduced one whit the amount of personal and corporate evil in the world. So we say, well, I don't believe in demons. We still have the problem of evil. We still have, you know, anybody who watches the news, anybody who's on Twitter or Facebook or anything, there are problems of evil that we're running into, and that I don't always know what to do with linguistically.
Two recent examples that come to my mind are greed.
Yeah.
The bank failure upstate. Some commentators are calling it saying the bank failed because the officers were greedy. Fox News that is being challenged, supposedly misrepresented, some of its representatives misrepresented the election to make money for Fox. These seem to be like significant examples of greed. The story of Macbeth.
Yeah, I love Macbeth.
Is probably a story about greed. So sure that you can win power. Not money, but maybe the money that goes with the royal power, that you think you cannot fail.
Yeah.
Ultimate greed. I think maybe this man in this story is possessed by some such fault or failure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get extra points for mentioning Macbeth. I used to teach Macbeth to high school students, and the PBS Great Performances version, which with Patrick Stewart, I don't know if anyone's seen it. If you have time, go watch that version of it, because they said it sort of in like it's not clear if it's like what war, but it's like vaguely World War I, World War II-ish. Like one of my students, because I taught in art school, was critiquing the military uniforms, that they're not consistent era-wise throughout the movie. But really turns it into this, what if it was like a war as we've experienced wars? What if it was set not in a time that's hard for us to relate to, but in a time that we could relate to? And then what are those forces that drive the evil that happens in this? And so it leaves it real open. And also the best part is, just to ruin a fun thing for you, the witches, the three witches that do the double toil and trouble, they're nurses on the battlefield. And it's so creepy because they're kind of holding soldiers' lives in their hands. And so it's a great movie. Watch it someday. PBS Great Performances, Macbeth. So that's my side commercial. And then demonic can be really dangerous language. As I pointed out from a podcast, I came across this and I got the book about it as well. In sectarianism, when you get to groups that are divided against each other and view one another as enemies, the language of demonic is like the most indicative that violence is or will happen. Once you call your enemies demons or demonic, that's when things go off the rails. Yeah.
Could you give us the reference to that study?
Yes.
Because I tried to find it. Okay.
It's in a book. And so I don't know if the study is widely available, but I will. Yeah, I have. The book is on my desk and I can't remember what it's called, but I'll find that for you. And so it's a long form study of the troubles in Northern Ireland and kind of what led to the sectarian divisions and how things escalate. And that's been an area of interest of mine. So it's a good book. But that language of demon, I don't know if anyone's witnessed it in our political discourse or our Twitter and Facebook discourse, but there are people calling people they disagree with demonic. And you have that language out there. And that, to me, once I listened to that podcast, how dangerous the language of demonic is, and that the language of demonic comes through faith often. And so we, as people in a faith community, we have a really big responsibility when it comes to division, when it comes to loving our neighbors, is to think about the language that we use. And so how do we balance this story? Hearing this scripture passage, honoring it for what it is saying and the culture it comes from and what it has for us today, and also not use that problematic language of demon when it's in the story. And so there's a tension there that I find, and also making people aware of how violent that language can be, the language of demon. So this is the sort of open time that you're open to discuss. What do you do about demons, spirits, and even the Holy Spirit? Does the Holy Spirit fit into a realm with other spirits? Is that something different? And so Bobby kind of kicked us off earlier talking about looking at mental health, looking at if my anxiety, that I suffer from anxiety, if a time when I have really bad anxiety, if that could just go, that would be great. Like if someone could just get rid of it, like I've had it long enough in my life to know when it's here that it will go and can trust and have techniques. But at the same time, if that could be removed from me, that would be feel like a demon being removed.
You'd be cleaned up.
I feel much better. I'd have to be much more effective at everything in general. So what do you do about demons? So this is an open discussion for you. And if you don't want to chat in front of the camera, we can go little groups and you can talk with a friend about demons. So yes, talk amongst yourselves. All right, Beryl.
Well, I'm with you. I've suffered in the past from anxiety and panic attacks in life, and I've had some inkling of them resurfacing after decades, and it makes me very nervous, and it would be, I agree with you, it'd be lovely if one could just, dismiss all of that and have it all go away for good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we often hear about like, oh, if you're faithful, you won't be anxious. You kind of have people with little pithy little sayings that, and I don't think that's our theology here, but that idea that, the reality of human suffering and the parts of suffering that we've all dealt with, it doesn't just go away like that. But what would it be if it would just go away? So, I was really anxious last week for whatever reason, and just nothing triggers it. It just sometimes will come. Well, maybe something triggers it. But a friend pointed out we're about 1 year, 3 years from pandemic shutdown. We're at the anniversary of March 2020 when everything shut down. And often your body will remember anniversaries in ways that mentally you haven't clocked yet. And so that kind of keyed into me why I was anxious. Was, oh yeah, we were watching these news reports 3 years ago of things creeping up, and it's March again, and the kids are doing the things in school that they do in March. And so whatever it is, those memories kind of brought that anxiety. And so the complexity of that. So that's a side note, not about demons, but keep an eye on yourself and your mental health right now, because there's a significant anniversary for all of us. What else? What do you do about demons?
Sometimes demons win.
Go on. Explain. So sometimes demons win.
Robert's nephew, diagnosed eventually as somebody with schizoid disorder, but began, hearing voices, and I mean, it just eventually was very clear that it was so disturbing, and he eventually took his own life. And I think that is not unusual. That's not the first time, at least, that I've known that to happen. They do sometimes overwhelm.
Yeah. And I think, the Craddock quote there as well, that whatever it is that this thing we're describing as demons, there's no less evil or suffering or despair in the world, even though we don't use that language of demons. So demons can win. All right, I'm going to check the chat. So you're all invited to talk to somebody close to you about what you do with demons. So take a moment amongst yourselves. I'll check the chat, and chat people are welcome to put their comments in there. So feel free to talk amongst yourselves. I'll be right back.
What do we do with demons?
I think about the side of things like my grandson and you have now.
Don't change. We know.
Oh yeah.
Maybe might be surviving. Like that.
He's a Christian, not typical,
Green is a demon. Don't say I have a demon. They don't acknowledge it.
Well,
even when, I'm not sure, even when they actually engage in fraudulent behavior, sometimes they risky behavior, that they now they offer that smart.
They don't have answers. No, no. Again, same as the it's right to go off the beds. So weird. So and I have a cousin, right, a little younger than it. Once, but I was tired. Yeah. She realized that's my thing. And he was diagnosed and I realized he has this problem inside the feet. Very smart. She has sponsor school because but she came out of it very big breaking.
Yeah.
Was me. Yes. Because she tries not to. Yeah. Talks openly about it. Yeah. She's trying to manage it all. She's managed to never called it. But yeah, it's just.
What about lying? What about the Congress? It's at the mind.
Whether you have, I just kind of, what is it? Called them to tell me when you somebody is always been assessed. In our medicine,
it's just strange. It's strange.
Yeah, well, I think
it's not exaggerating.
Yeah.
One day
well, when I had my second panic attack about 10 years. So why? I look at
I had to go taking a team and anything other than dominating.
I would take it. Yeah, well, I think well, but you start improvising and that's what we have. And that's what we power on writing. And it's like was you try to do that. It did help her. Yes, it did. But you
even as what you're trying to do.
My sister wrote out and then she outlived Richard Library, so she wrote another piece.
I'll be without one.
But
Well,
yeah, the children wrote it very much. No, they can't. She was sick. I don't know.
a question.
Yes.
Both of these passages use the word destroy. I think that even says, what are you trying to do? Destroy, B-O-R.
Yeah.
Is there any enlightenment to be provided how this relationship between this word and Greek?
So
what does it mean, destroy us?
It can mean destroy or it can mean loosen. And the funny thing is, it's like the verb you conjugate in beginning Greek. It's just like the verb that follows the rules. And so you it's a very common word to work with as a student of Greek. So I think that's just coincidental that I laughed when you said this word destroy. So yeah, luo, whatever. I can't conjugate anymore off the top of my head, but it's just the verb that you work with. You are looking at destruction is sort of in the minds of the gospel writers. because when Gospels were written, right, we're after destruction, right? We're after, what are the dates on the Gospels? I can't remember off the top of my head, but the destruction of the temple.
Physical destruction.
Right, so they're writing in this time of things were destroyed. So that may be a callback in some ways, just to people's awareness of destruction. It may be just the best word for what someone could do to you if they were going to annihilate, hurt, cause harm to you. Destruction might be the best word there. So I don't know if it's the mindfulness of the gospel writers of destruction that has happened, or if it is just the best word that's available for the writers. So yeah, I'm happy to think about that more. But off the top of my head, that's where I come down on that. I have.
What is this demon going to be without? If the demon is destroyed.
Yeah, if the demon is destroyed. And it takes a different sort of meaning in the two, because in Mark, the scribes are involved. Are you going to destroy us? Are you going to destroy, is that just the demon? Is it the demons and the scribes? Is that the demons and scribes, the synagogue? Who is the us in Mark? In Luke, it's just the demons wondering, are you going to destroy us? And what would that mean? So I don't have a great answer, besides it's strong language. It's provocative.
And I think the us is the citizenry, a larger group of people who are under the same possession as this man.
Yeah.
That he's not alone. At least he thinks he's not alone.
Yeah.
That he and others are going to be giving up something vital.
Go back to your comment about greed. You know, is it only Silicon Valley that was greedy? You got the bank in New York.
Yeah, they put about 6 banks on a list to investigate.
Yeah.
To review.
Well, except that even though demon is singular, the plural seems to be more common when they're cast into a herd of swine.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's legion, plural. Right? We are legion. You get like
we're a legion, and
right.
that I relate it more to that it's a plural in terms of its use. I asked myself, why is this story in here? Mm-hmm. Why did Mark and Luke, why did they use it? And I wonder if it's not just that it represents a capacity for healing or for destruction of something negative, but the recognition that the supposed demon calls out, I know who you are, the Holy One of God. I wonder if that's not also important to this story, that there's an acknowledgement, a signifying that they wanted to have.
Yeah, I think so. Well, this is the first teaching story. Well, not the first in Luke, but in Mark, this is Jesus's first act of his ministry. This is the first thing he does. So this is what Mark 1:21 through 27. And Mark, we don't get, lineage, we don't get birth, nothing in Mark. You just go right to the action. And so you fly right into this in Mark. This is the first thing you see Jesus do. Yeah. We who've been doing the Bible study know that Jesus unrolled the scroll and got people mad at him. So there's already been a little bit of controversy, but this is still very early in Jesus's ministry of teaching. The 4th chapter of Luke is where Jesus begins to do work, having moved out of sort of where he came from, birth story, all that kind of lineage stuff. So it's a foundational story. It's at the beginning of who we encounter Jesus to be.
And it's when Jesus establishes his authority, it's here.
Yeah, well, it's important storytelling wise in terms of now we know who he is, so in Luke, where he's come from, that he's filled with God's Spirit, that he's thrown off his temptation from the devil, and now we know what he does. And so we get to that part. And so it fleshes out that identity of Jesus. In the Gospels and the type of writing that they were doing, you don't get character development as you do in modern texts and novels, but you do have this. We're adding to what we know about Jesus. We're picking up hints, and this is a really big piece of who Jesus is and what Jesus is going to do. But it's also weird, I think, and jarring and loud. And Betty had asked, she said, why doesn't Jesus get in trouble for this healing? Is it that no one's on his tail yet? Is it that nobody knows what he does, and so now he's going to start being trailed by authorities? Is this what puts him on the most wanted list. Yeah. Is this the thing that does it? And Beryl also mentioned the Holy One of God as a title. That's not a super common title in the Bible, but it does tie back to Elisha, the prophet Elisha. And so that's where we see that title also used in the Bible. And Luke is interested in tying Jesus into the lineage of the prophets. That's part of what Luke is doing. And so it's a prophetic title. It's not just a teacher, not just a guy, it's a prophet, and prophets would be able to speak what God would want to speak, right? They tell the truth, they tell God's truth, they speak for God. And so it means significantly that this other spiritual power recognizes that Jesus is speaking for God. And so that's a significant title. I wrote a few things down. Betty brought up the point, the way we think about demons, how much is that influenced by horror movies and not by our faith? Horror movies, scary films, The Exorcist, Poltergeist, whatever. How many of those images are we reading back into the text that we're not meant to read back into the text, but we can't help but bring our context with us? So how many troubling images of demons are we culturally putting in and that are not actually in the text or in our theology? So that was a good point. And then Bill asked the question, is there one devil and many demons? I think functionally in the text, that's kind of the theology people have walked away with. But I'm, like I said, I'm skeptical of Satan and demons in general, because I'm a big fan of Job. Job is my favorite book in the Bible. And you have Hasatan with Satan, but it's the adversary. It's at that time, there was an understanding that there was more than one sort of cosmic God power, sort of a council of lesser gods. And this is sort of the adversary who kind of gets in there and makes trouble. And so if we're getting Satan, as we understand Satan today from some of the lineage there, I don't see the lineage. And I think the Satan we have today is a lot more cultural than religious. But that's me. That's why I get in trouble in creeds and confessions class. I'm saying that all the time. Anybody else? What do you do about demons and devils? I gave you time to talk amongst yourselves. Did anyone leave with any? Oh, and someone asked for clarification on the question. I just meant, how do we contextualize the language of demon? When you read demon, what do you do with that? Do you just say, yeah, that's a demon and move on with your life? Or is it more complex for you? So any insights from your chat with your friends?
Well, I agree with you about demons and devil. I don't put much stock into it because my history with it is from Orthodox religion and fundamental religion, and it's always a real person, and I don't subscribe to that at all. And so things that are, I just see evil in the world as a person doing things that are not in line with God. They've turned away from God. It's not a person. So I don't have any use for the word Satan or demons. And are you saying that your professor wanted you to believe in demons?
They wanted me to acknowledge, like in the creeds and confessions when demons came up, I said, I really don't, that part doesn't speak to my faith. And they'd say, well, but it's in the Bible. And I'd say, well, yeah, but also like there's a lot of stuff in the Bible that is not part of my particular faith. So yeah, it's just,
wow, I'm shocked by that.
It's okay. Well, I can explain later about that, but I chose to be trouble in that way in that class, knowing that I would get in trouble in that way in that class. So yeah.
And don't you think demons could be like depression, alcoholism, and drugs?
Yeah.
And alcoholism and some things are treatable and could be called out by medical science.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways to deal with physical demons.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that who's ever witnessed someone dealing with something that felt like they couldn't control, right? So if you had a loved one with an addiction or mental health struggles or anything that they felt like they could not get a handle on, we've seen that and what that looks like and how scary that is, right? And is that something to do with what's going on with demons? Or is demons, greed and lack of care for one's neighbor and, putting yourself first and, is it believing that, the hubris, not trusting in God, but believing that you're going to be the one who does the work in the world and it's not God through you who does that, so what are those multiple things that could be demons? I think it's interesting when we start looking at what are those things that it seems like we can't shake. And what are those things we say? Why are our leaders greedy? Why are our leaders lying? Why are our leaders choosing these things for themselves when that's not good? And that's not helpful, right? And so we see these, is it a lot of things? Are demons a whole range of things? And maybe it's a term we should bring back and reappropriate for, I see no shaking heads of the left, anything else? Les, was that?
I've never felt a need for demons because I can get enough trouble by myself.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So Les has never felt a need for demons because he can get in trouble enough by himself. So, no, I think, yeah, that makes sense. Or I always come back to what's Paul's line, like, I do the thing I do not want to do, right? If you've ever been in a bad habit, or like, for me, like, buying stuff I don't need. Like, I'm very try to be ethical and buy secondhand, and then you're at the thrift store and you're like, I should buy 4 shirts today. And that's sort of like, I don't need it. Like, it's not evil, but it's knowing like, well, I don't need this thing, but like, I want to do this thing. And so, maybe a lesser demon. But those things that
I say the things that I shouldn't be saying. Classic case for me was my mother once said, "Are you listening to me?" And I said, "Sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't give a damn."
Yeah. So the things we
luckily
say
my father wasn't around.
So the things when we know we're behaving maybe not in the most loving ways, does that fit in the category of demons, right? Was there anything else in the story you wanted to interrogate? I threw out a few things. The Holy One of God, I thought was an interesting thing, the tie back to Elisha. Any idea why it matters to Luke that the man was unharmed? Anyone have any ideas about that? That one I'm curious about.
We were just talking about unharmed and thinking of the healing story as the blind man who's made to see, and that was attributed to sin, for example, of his parents allegedly, or his something of that nature. He was not harmed. The man who had the legion of demons that went into the pigs was not harmed. So what is the point of saying specifically this man was not harmed? Does it have any significance to, the saving stories, the healing stories, if you attribute it to a demon or some such being?
Yeah.
And are they ethereal? I mean, when I think of a demon, it's like something I can sort of see through and being drawn out and taken out of the individual. They just go poof.
Yeah. What comes to the demon when you draw it out? What happens to it? Beryl, was that a response?
Well, I'd like to respond in a far less esoteric kind of way. With if you have epilepsy, which a relative of mine has, and there's a convulsion, I mean, to come out of that unharmed is an important thing. It could be because one of the stories refers to the spirit convulsed him as he came out. And that struck me as, and he was unharmed, is an important way of just saying it. And the man was okay afterward. That's simple. I didn't go any further.
All right, and there's some more speculation in the chat about unharmed indicates and emphasizes that distinction between the man and the demon. The demon is gone, the man is unharmed. So we see that the demon was never the man.
Yeah.
The man was continuously a beloved child of God. The demon was continuously a demon, and they were not the same thing. And then also Betty's wondering if the man was part of Luke's community and provided a firsthand account. He's like, Jesus saved me and I was fine. I was great. I felt wonderful. I did 100 jumping jacks after he got this thing out of me, right? Was it like a firsthand account? And then just thinking, by one of our New Hope friends, she says, how do we understand demons in our theology today is important, requires a conversation about how theology is studied and established and by whom, right? So it's a big discussion. We're not gonna have the theological understanding. We're not publishing a paper today based on our understanding of demons, but it's a deep discussion. What is this language there? How has it become problematic? What does it mean in our theology? She said it makes her think of people like Michael Heiser, who wrote the book, The Unseen Realm, and other theologians that speak so clearly about spiritual mysteries, but much of that theology is not taught in traditional churches. And so are we equipped to talk about spiritual things, spiritual realms? Is that something that our theology has equipped us to do? Or is that something we're just trying to kind of piece together on the run because it's confusing when we come across demons? So
spiritual warfare.
Yeah, I come across, sometimes I get in conversations on the internet I should not get into on the internet, but sometimes I choose to be trouble. And I often get the spiritual warfare thing kicked at me by generally evangelical Christians who want to tell me about spiritual warfare. And that's not my language, so I usually don't engage with them on spiritual warfare.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
It's an evangelical concept, think evangelical, that at all times demons are battling for your spirit. That there's like a
that's kind of what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Right. And so it's a common theory. Does not have a place in my theology. And so, but that's language that if you run across it, how do you respond? Do you have any thinking on it, Les, or just kind of a concept?
Nope.
Yeah, it's what is happening if there is a spiritual realm, and where are we in that, and how is that located? So I think there's a lot of room for curiosity. There's one last thing.
I can see how you can get that from a number of biblical stories.
Yeah,
clearly.
And there can be other theologies. There's no reason that I don't think my theology is the best. It's just mine, right? And so other people can have room for different theologies, and that's okay with me. But that's not something that is operative in my understanding of God. And then we also had a note, I believe we ought to explain the concept of demons based not on our own understanding, but based on the words of Jesus. I don't disagree. We do need to let the text interpret the text, but I don't think we get a lot of help in the text about what demons are. It's just, we don't get a lot in this story. We do get, there is a man, something that is, I say tormenting. I don't know if you can get tormenting out of the story, but for some reason, there is something that is separating the man from cleanliness, which doesn't have to mean he smells nice, but belonging in a holy place at a holy time. Something is separating him, something is harming him, something is causing problems for him. However we want to understand that, I think is a little bit open. That what are we going to do? These things that stand between us and God, between us and holy spaces, are not things that God wants. They're not things that Jesus wants us to have. And so I think there's a lot of openness in this and what we do. But I wrote down a question for you. Oh, what are elements of Jesus's authority? So we see Jesus has authority in this story. What can we establish that authority looks like, just based on a short passage? So what does Jesus's authority look like? Using the textual evidence we have in front of us.
Authenticity.
Go on, say more. Authenticity.
Well, his voice had authority.
Yeah. So is it tone? I mean, is he speaking, is confidence part of it? Or is
he
that
commands.
Commanding, okay. I think liberating. He liberates the man, because I don't know if I want to say healing or exercising. I don't know where I land on what's the event that's happening, but liberating I can see for sure.
Changes people.
Mm-hmm.
The unclean spirit leaves, departs.
Yeah.
One is different.
Is it an unclean spirit or a changing of the inner being of the person?
Well, I think the unclean spirit is the metaphor, or perhaps that, or theological purity, or theological authenticity.
Yeah, I think, and that's a good question to ponder. Does he change the man, or does he remove something, or is it both? In removing, he changes. In removing, he heals. Oh, heal. I'd say healing because of he's not harmed. And he probably didn't look super healthy with the yelling and the demon, but now he's unharmed at the end of this.
Keep in mind, he's changing a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Mark says in the last sentence that once his fame began to spread across county lines.
Mm-hmm.
We've been told that in previous verses of Luke 4.
Yeah.
When he's in Nazareth, we're told his reputation precedes him. So he's changing a lot of minds, or creating widespread controversy.
Yeah, I wrote controversial down already because I thought if you're working before. Yeah. And can be division, right? Controversy doesn't have to be dividing, but there has to be some tension within controversy.
Tension.
Yeah. I was thinking if you accept Luke acts as a unified whole, which Mark has told us he might not before.
And probably when he leaves town, the scribes have a very open kind of conversation the next day.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of talk about what happened.
Much of it counter.
Yeah. Well, and if Jesus gets in trouble for this, that there's the people who are amazed and the people who are scandalized and the people who are going to do something about it. So we kind of sort into camps there. I was going to say, if we see Luke acts, it's sort of the story about expanding, that you kind of have the expansion to the community, the expansion, and then you get to Acts, you get, expansion of the Holy Spirit out into the world. So you have this sort of expanding, and we see that happening in this chapter of Luke as well. You have Jesus and his lineage, who he is, expanding to the people in Galilee, expanding through the region. So this is kind of the expansion of the influence of Jesus throughout this story as well. Anything else about his authority? I have that his authority is authentic, commanding, confident, liberating, changing, removing trouble. I could have worded that better. Healing, controversial, and causes tension. Any other elements of his authoritative teaching? I think it's good for him. Loud. I think loud is happening. I don't know if the demon's loud, but he probably has to be loud to yell over the spirit. Okay, that's not very important. All right, so our theme for Lent is joining Jesus at the margins. Just preliminarily, what are we seeing about Jesus and the margins in this story? So where are the margins? What is the margin that we're examining here?
Well, at this point, you have to tie in that question with Thurman's book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the margin is his character. We're convulsing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We don't want anything to do with him.
Yeah.
And Jesus does.
Yeah. That was the one sermon I preached on the Mark passage. It was my final assessment sermon for the presbytery to decide that I was done with my process. And so I talked about, and what I noticed that time I read it was how Jesus turned to him. There's and I use curiosity as a way to talk about it, that you have this person who many people would not want to look at. I don't know if you ever encountered someone in public acting erratically, and most people just kind of look anywhere but at that person. Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus looks right at the person. And so that attentiveness to a person who's suffering. So I think we see that that's the margin that most of us would just say, I'm not equipped to deal with this. And Jesus does look at that person. And then what does that tell us about who we are meant to be as followers of Jesus? I think it's not an easy question. Are we supposed to? What are we not doing that we should be doing because we're afraid? And that was the second chapter of Thurman, was about fear, right? Fear. We talked a lot in the discussion about that, but when you're marginalized, and how much of your life is fear, and how much of this man's life was fear, how much of the people around him were experiencing fear, how much fear left this room when Jesus healed the man. I don't know what the third chapter is yet that we're discussing tonight because I haven't read it yet. And that's an afternoon. Let me check the chat. Beryl, real quick.
But I'm forced to say that I don't feel in me that power. I mean, whether I'm looking at paranoid schizophrenia, where I'm looking at epilepsy, where I'm looking at manic depressive, whatever, to be able to face someone and have the power to say, I'm making you clean.
Right. Yeah. And that's an important note, is that I'm not encouraging you all today to go walk out to people that you don't feel qualified to serve and try to help them, because that's actually not helping them at all. And that's a big part of my work in youth ministry, has been knowing when things are above my pay grade and calling in Gretchen, our parish counselor, to help me out with things. And knowing that is how we handle those things. So not saying, hey, everyone, go find a person you think has a demon and fix them today. That would be an irresponsible message to give you. But noticing that Jesus does turn towards the people on the margins in this story. So I think we can leave with that, at least. So don't do anything dumb, anybody. I did not rubber stamp that. Okay, I'm going to check the chat for any last questions, and then we'll wrap up. Declaration authority comes before the healing. So we'll point out, so Jesus declares healing before the healing happens. So that's interesting. The text mentions authority before Jesus takes care of this unclean demon, which indicates that the authority was obvious without the healing. So they said Jesus taught authoritatively, which they were astounded at his teaching because he spoke with authority. So we see speak with authority. And word is very performative in the Bible. If someone speaks an oath, they can't go back on it. You have people who, what's his name, Judges, who says, oh, whatever comes out of the house, we're gonna burn that as an offering. And it's his daughter who comes out of the house first. And because he said they would burn her, he has to. So you have ways in which word is binding in some cultural moments and things. So Jesus's word being authoritative might be bigger than we're understanding language to be authoritative, more binding, more performative. But then I think it seconds or doubles down on the healing that the teaching with authority and then healing with authority. So it's not just one thing, it's more. And so I think that's a good point, that the authority is there before the healing, but what happens to the authority after the healing? It seems much bigger to me than just an authoritative teacher and a healer. So, all right, anything else? Questions, comments, additional things about demons? We could have gotten to a really nice post-colonial sort of analysis of colonized peoples. We were getting there during a comment earlier about people who buy into power, thinking that the power of the society is the power that's important, the power of the structures that be are important. Mark gets more into that than Luke does. But here we see, where is that power that's important? The power that's healing is from the Holy One of God. And so kind of realigns us to what is real power in this. So anyway, question?
It's dramatic beginning.
It is dramatic, yes. And I do think that the Bible does some great storytelling too, and that there is some storytelling that is good storytelling because people like stories. We're engaged by stories, we're compelled by stories. We come back to the stories that are good. And this is one that even if we don't always know what to do with it, it's a great story. It's a great story, right? And more than that. So, all right, well, thank you for joining us. I hope going back and forth between the chat and the Zoom didn't inconvenience the Zoom people too much.
Thank you.
And we can end the recording whenever